Hi, this is Paul. For a long time now, I've wanted to do some work on Lex Fridman's conversation with John Vervaeke. I thought it was a really terrific conversation with Vervaeke. I know that there's a new one out with, oh, I forget the guy's name, another long one. He's another major YouTuber. I think he was the guy who did like the 4 Hour Work Week or something like that. I forget his name right now. But that was also interesting. A bunch of people had talked to me about that. And I haven't really dived into John's After Socrates series either. There's just a lot of stuff out there to do, and it's, of course, I have to fit all of these other things within audiobooks and such like that. Now, I do want to jump into this section where he's talking to Lex Fridman, and just to give you a little bit of orientation, I'm, continuing to ponder and process and plan and think about what we are going to talk about in May with the quest for a spiritual home. And at this point, John's talking to Lex about wisdom and established religions.
Wisdom isn't optional. That's why it is perennial, cross-cultural, cross-historical, because of the perennial problems. But we do not have homes for ecologies of practices that fit into our scientific technological worldview so that they are considered legitimate. The fastest growing demographic
What he just said there is hugely important, and what he's going to say right now.
group are the nuns, N-O-N-E-S. They have no religious allegiance, but they are not primarily atheistic.
Okay, let's slow it down again and hear what he says about homes. We do not have homes.
We do not have homes for ecologies of practices that fit into our scientific technological worldview so that they are considered legitimate. The fastest growing demographic group are the nuns, N-O-N-E-S. They have no religious allegiance, but they are not primarily atheistic. They most frequently describe themselves with this has become almost everybody now described, I'm spiritual but not religious. Mm-hmm. Which means they are trying to find a way of reducing the bullshit and enhancing the connectedness, but they don't want to turn to any of the legacy established religions by and large.
Well,
That's the point he makes there is absolutely huge. And obviously, for me as a Christian minister, something I'm tremendously interested in. Some of you who are watching the full panoply of PVK videos know that, I'm in a denomination that is currently having a civil war over same-sex marriage. And those of you who are watching my videos know I believe that the Christian Reformed Church is going to have a split of at least into, my hope is that we can maybe go into two denominations that won't be too far apart from each other, so we can continue discussing and processing and doing all those kinds of things together, even over the divide over this issue. But that's just one tiny little thing. And in the Christian Reformed Church, the struggle and the difficulty that the Christian Reformed Church has been having for the last 40 years really has little or nothing to do with that particular issue. It has everything to do with whole ranges of issues that have to do with exactly what John is putting his finger on. There's been to great degree, I'm going to play it again because he said it very, very well.
Have homes for ecologies of practices that fit into our scientific technological worldview.
Now, I think it's partly the scientific technological worldview. I think another part of it is also sort of a moral worldview. And I'm going to drop a little bit of my Sunday school class in about that. Because on this video, John makes the point to Lex that he's made to me, which I have some thoughts about in terms of, I think, a la Tom Holland, all Christianity has so colonized and shaped our moral assumptions in the West that even this is a point made by Tom Holland and many, many other people, even our evaluation of the legacy religious homes is built within a matrix that has come to us through Christianity. The civil war that the Christian Reformed Church is fighting is can only be understood within Christianity. In other words, both sides in the Christian Reformed Church's particular fight over same-sex marriage, both those who want to affirm and those who want to who are not affirming, both of them are coming armed with Christian arguments. They're coming armed with Christian arguments from a panoply of places, but they're coming to it with Christian arguments. This is just so deeply nested within where we are at now. Let's hear a little bit more as this goes.
So that they are considered legitimate. The fastest growing demographic group are the nuns, N-O-N-E-S. They have no religious allegiance, but they are not primarily atheistic. They most frequently describe themselves with this has become almost everybody now describes, I'm spiritual but not religious, which means they are trying to find a way of reducing the bullshit and enhancing the connectedness, but they don't want to turn to any of the legacy established religions by and large.
Well, isn't both religion and the nuns, isn't wisdom a process, not a destination? So trying...
That's sort of a kitschy thing to say, but I don't find that people can actually live that out. There certainly is process in terms of discovering wisdom, but ideally, the quest for a spiritual home implies that there is an arriving that one. You don't. This is a point that C.S. Lewis made decades ago. That the point of a journey is to arrive. And the quest for a spiritual home is not life on the road. Now, I'm going to make an argument that what we have in this world cannot finally fully satisfy. And that gives birth then to the shape of the Christian religion. It gives shape to the... So when John is wrestling with a home, we are looking for something that religious communities have been able to instantiate, even though there's always a tension within Christianity between the journey and the home, because there's something deep within the Christian story, within the stories of Jesus, that suggests to us. I'm currently working on my Good Friday sermon and my Easter sermon. You cannot wrestle with the historical reality of Good Friday and everything that leads up to it. Those of you who've been following the Rough Drafts for Sundays, these apocalyptic parables, the apocalypse of the hidden king, that's what I'm basically looked at this Lenten season. You cannot wrestle with that without noticing that the risen Christ, who should be the arrival and is the arrival of Christian destination, the Christian life, the risen Christ ascends, and Christians anticipate a second coming where the home will arrive, the New Jerusalem. So these tensions are baked into the Christian story. So just to say, well, it's just a process. I'm sorry. The process of the process of eating is towards satisfaction. And I've been doing a lot of thinking, too, about Westerns and superhero movies and masculinity. The process, back to my Dr. Jim conversation, that I watched that Paul Anleitner talked about the Magnificent Seven, and we saw Yul Brynner come on the Magnificent Seven. In a sense, he had a sense of, I want to be like Yul Brynner, young Paul Anleitner. And so I watched the Magnificent Seven the other night, and there's this moment in the story where, of course, the Magnificent Seven is basically just a westernized, an American Western version of the Seven Samurai, if you've seen that in many ways. So there's a little village in Mexico that is being plagued by bandits. It's the same story as that old animated movie with the ants and the grasshoppers and ants. I don't remember the name of that movie either, but my kids watched that when they were little. Basically, this Mexican village is being tormented and colonized by these bandits, and they steal all their food, and some in the village want to stand up, and so they go up north of the border, and they find these gunslingers. They find Yul Brynner, and Yul Brynner is sort of the the good bad man. He's the kind of hero you need, and so he gathers this other group of gunslingers, and they're going to go south of the border, and they're going to help this village. And I won't give away too many spoilers, but they have this very interesting scene about 2/3 of the way through the movie with all of these gunslingers talking, and they basically they're all longing for home. They're all longing for a home that they're never going to know because they're gunslingers. And part of the reason that they're helping this little Mexican village for no money is because in their moral imagination, they know that even if they can't arrive at home, they want to give these people a home. And you see this is, so I've been watching the Exodus series too. You see this built into, let's say Moses, who never arrives at the promised land. You see this built into David, who never is able to finish, he's never allowed to build the temple. And so even Jesus has a part of this. The whole Jesus story is Jesus is in that sense sort of like a gunslinger, because he comes in and Jesus announces the kingdom of heaven. He teaches about the kingdom of heaven. He points to the kingdom of heaven. He's the way, the truth, and the life. But in the story of the Gospels, Jesus doesn't really fully arrive, and the disciples don't fully arrive. And so Christianity has within it this tension of the quest for the spiritual home and this longing and arrival for a spiritual home. And so it's not just a process. You can't really land that. Let's let him talk a little bit more.
To find, if you're a deeply faithful, religious person, you're also trying to find, right? So just because you have a place where you're looking, or a set of traditions around which you're constructing the search, it's nevertheless a search, and isn't. So I guess, is there a case to be made that this is just the usual human condition? How do you answer if you ask 5 centuries ago where?
Okay, but let's talk about this human condition, because this has everything to do with the quest for a spiritual home. And part of me, people often wonder why I do the Randall's conversations. I haven't done a lot of them yet, just in terms of my schedule recently. But part of the reason is because one of the things, and Peterson talks about this better than a lot of other people with his equilibrated state, we want to arrive at home and arrive at a stable home for my future self forevermore. Eternal life, the Bible would talk about it. But we want it also for the people around us. We don't want it just for me at the exclusion of the other people. We don't want it just for me, just in never land. There has to be a continuity. There has to be a connection, and it has to go all the way through.
Where do you look for wisdom? I mean, I suppose people would be more inclined to answer, well,
and you're going to have to ask, what is wisdom for? What is wisdom for the journey for?
The Bible or a religious text.
Right, and they had a worldview that was considered not just religious, but also rational. So we now have these two things, orthogonal or often oppositional, spirituality and rationality. But if you go before a particular historical period, you look back in the Neoplatonic tradition.
Now there's a great moment of that in the Exodus series where they point out that in many ways, part of what happens in the Enlightenment is rational replaces the destination of the kingdom of God, and so then rational becomes both the telos, that which we're striving for, but also the process, that which we strive for. And what we're seeing is that postmodernity is basically, an image pops to mind. When I pull out your bingo cards, when I was living in the Dominican Republic, we were celebrating Thanksgiving with a bunch of us expats who were living in a little town in the Dominican Republic, and the home, we were at the home of our friends who had a lovely rented house in our area, and he wasn't a missionary. He was working, to help a Dominican company improve their shrimp farming, basically. And they had a Weimaraner, and they had this stray cat that just kept coming into the house and going all around. And so we're just sitting outside. We're going to have Thanksgiving dinner together, all of us Americans. And sure enough, the stray cat walks in, and my friend, the woman of the house who owned the Weimaraner, said, "Get it, Flint." Flint was this Weimaraner, and that dog was on that cat in 2 seconds. And there in front of, my children were small. Everyone, most of us had small children. We're just sitting outside enjoying the lovely weather in the evening, and this Weimaraner just completely decimates this cat right in front of all the kids. And my friend just felt so bad. Well, that's, oh shoot, the story was so powerful. I forgot how I was connecting it. I was connecting it with, with rationality. And this is what postmodernity is doing to rationality. This is what postmodernity is doing to science. It's get it, Flint, and it grabs the cat of modernity and whoosh, 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 whoosh. If you've ever seen a big dog dispatch a cat, it's a powerful image.
Like before the scientific revolution, those two are not in opposition. They are deeply interwoven, so that you can have a sense of legitimacy and deep realness and grounding in your practices. We don't have that anymore. And I'm not advocating.
And what John's basically laying out here is a cohesive world where the science and the religion aren't opposed to each other, where everything fits. And of course, people are always looking for the way to make things fit, and the way that a lot of people are currently doing is sort of getting rid of the old religious homes and trying to construct their new home. But part of the difficulty, and I've been talking about autodidacts fitting into the church, another video I want to make. I'm waiting for Harry Bohr's book, Confessionalism. Harry Bohr had this fight with the Christian Reformed Church. He was a missionary in Africa. Pretty much his whole career, he was teaching theology to Nigerians, and there were issues that he had with the canons of Dort. And he wanted to discuss these issues, and he wanted to challenge these issues. And what he found was that the church was not a tremendously hospitable or productive place to have what I often call a confessional conversation. And I think what we've been finding in our world is that we find ourselves making homes on the internet in our own tiny little niches. And what we have enjoyed in the past has been much better rounded homes in terms of church homes, where you have lots of people who can fit together, not just the people who have, let's say, high IQs and high education, but people who know how to fix cars, or know how to cut down trees, or know how to make casseroles, or know how to do well at home. You actually have a fully well-rounded community, and that church then provides the basis for this. And I think a lot of the shredding of that has happened obviously through pluralism, obviously through autodidacts, but also the capacity of the churches to figure out how to productively process the differences that emerge. Now, one of the differences, obviously, that emerges that within the Christian Reformed Church is, can you have a community where you don't have a shared sexual ethic? Can you have a community where you don't have at least enough agreement on hierarchies and ideals that are instantiated within it? Now, let's see, maybe now is the time to slip in that Sunday school clip. So maybe I'll do that now. So yeah, Paul, put it here. Christians better people. I'm just going to do it this way. Now, I think, generally speaking, yes, but you can very easily find someone who is not a Christian who is a moral superior to another person who is a Christian. So you have a sample question. Now I get to comment on myself. Look this way. It's not just morality, because what I'm wrestling with in this particular Sunday school lesson will be in Romans 7 for a few weeks, because Romans 7 is really a pivotal chapter. You're wrestling not just with morality, you're wrestling with satisfaction. You're wrestling with the ability to deliver at least an acceptable amount of shalom within the journey. And then you decide to maybe do statistics. And you can look at the work of, let's say, Gallup, who wrote 20 years ago or so at least, wrote a very interesting book called The Saints Among Us, where he basically shows that Christian people give more money to charity. Christian people, and this is on the whole statistically, Christian people give more of their money away to charity. Christian people serve their community more. And people say, well, that's just their churches. No. Christian people serve non-Christian people, the poor, the homeless, the blind. Christian people, generally speaking, statistically speaking, outperform other atheist, non-secular people. In other words, generally speaking, there is a correlation between... Now, this is really going to get into the nuns, because my guess is that as people leave their spiritual homes, their performance starts to deteriorate. Now, it could very well be that their performance started to deteriorate even before they left their spiritual homes. Before they left, they stopped tithing, they stopped giving, they stopped serving. This is the point that Tony Campolo made to Bart Campolo. Bart became this humanist chaplain at Harvard, I believe. But the point is that there's a correlation between this religiosity and the performance. Aspects of Christian performance, church going, tithing, and all kinds of other behaviors that we as a secular society tend to correlate with moral behavior. Now, I could go a lot more into this, but I'm not. You also have to make the argument that it's also true that with certain Muslims in the West, Muslims who go to mosque more often also tend to do a little better moral performance than the general population. And Jews that go to synagogue a lot also morally outperform the non-religious observant in the general population. And so then when I have these conversations with people, they will point this out to me that, is it actually Christian belief that distinguishes it? Or is it conscientious, disciplined, moral, religious performance in general? In other words, going back to the argument early in the book, does a Christian outperform, does a Christian who goes to church, has been baptized, practices Christian disciplines, does that person outperform a Jew who is going to synagogue, keeping the law, doing all of these things? And the difficulty that you have with all of these things is, how on earth can you ever compare two human beings? Now, you can compare them with respect to, like, say, height or weight or a whole bunch of physical things. But moral performance as individual people can be enormously difficult to actually evaluate. Because you can look at someone who is very scrupulous in their behavior and also self-righteous, in which their moral behavior, the self-righteousness, completely undermines the beauty of the moral behavior. And of course, Jesus makes this point in the Sermon on the Mount. To make this argument even more complex, and this I haven't heard a lot of argumentation, but I believe it's true. And I actually thought of this after the first time that I listened to the John Vervaeke Lex Fridman conversation, because John and I had talked about this before. When people do these studies in the Christian West, I would argue this entire framework has been deeply impacted by the way that Jesus has totally colonized our moral imagination for 2,000 years. Oops, hit the wrong button. And it might not just be moral performance. It might be satisfaction. It might be, in many ways, the loss of the nuns to the church. When people stop going to church. Part of the reason that the same-sex marriage debate in the Christian Reformed Church is so fierce, and I've been watching the whole transgender debate play out on Twitter. That, on one hand, in this little corner, there's generally sort of and this is very much on John's side of things, to say, well, we sort of hold on less, we can hold on less tightly to a lot of these propositional things. And it's like, yeah, but I can think of a whole bunch of propositions that you are not going to want to hold loosely in your hands, such as, shall we marginalize, disadvantage, even imprison, and put to death our religious rivals? Oh no, freedom of religion. And this is where we sort of wander into the bigger debate that's going on, which is over liberalism. Because in many ways, as postmodernity continues to wail away on the cat that is this imagined rationality that the Enlightenment brought forward, liberalism itself is up for debate. And there's a whole lot of stuff packed with liberalism, and you have people both on the right and on the far right and on the far left that in many ways want sort of a new regime that has built into it the kinds of moral and behavioral demands that are inherent to that regime. So I don't think, I've never thought that just sort of getting rid of propositions or demoting propositions. I think the key is, I think you're just going to have to sort through propositions and figure out what are the keepers and how those hierarchies are really going to work. Now, someone recommended this video to me, and I haven't had a chance to go through it, but the second of their conversations just popped up in my feed, and I listened to a little bit of that. Thought, oh boy, I really got to go back and listen to this first one. And I know a lot of you recommend a lot of videos to me. And you might think I have some woo-woo or spooky or spiritual reason for it, and whatever you think of that. But for me, very often, a video is available to me when it's the right time and place. And I think the right time and place had come for this. Now, in both of these conversations, her sound level's a little low. I just noticed that. So they did a conversation on her YouTube channel. So hopefully if she's making YouTube videos, she'll get a little better camera, get a little better mic. That kind of upgrading is helpful. DC Schindler really needs one. He had a conversation on Karen's channel. So as people sort of creep into this little corner, getting the sound better is a good thing. Anyway, here we go.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here.
So why don't you tell us, a little bit about yourself? Where are you coming from? How did you get to where you are? What's your work now? How do you see it interacting with my work, etc.?
Absolutely. So I'm a clinical psychotherapist. I have a neuroscience undergraduate degree, a master's in clinical social work with a mental health specialization from UCLA, and I've spent the last 15 years working with anxiety, nervous system regulation, trauma, psychodynamic, somatic work with individuals, couples, and families. And there's a natural extension from the kind of shadow work and this kind of nervous system regulation work into the spiritual realm, I think.
I'm trying to boost her sound so that she comes through, especially on the audio podcast. But there's always tells with language. So shadow work, okay, Jungian. So now we're sort of in that framework here.
And it's just sort of a natural developmental stage in my experience. And so, like you, I grew up in a conservative Christian home where I had these really genuine encounters with spirituality. And yet it was coupled with this oppressive, culture that really is at odds with authentic spirituality. So it created such this.
And right where, okay, so you have a framework. Now, you can evaluate that framework, but the point is, if you call something oppressive, that's a moral evaluation of a particular regime. And I'm not saying it wasn't, because you're not going to find me say that there aren't oppressive Christian cultures out there, but you have to understand that all of these evaluative words are, in fact, evaluations, and evaluations have evaluators. So let's continue.
This deep conflict within me, because on the one hand, I was encountering something really powerful and real that felt true to my soul. And on the other hand, I was having these experiences where I felt like I had to be in this warlike relationship with myself. And now as I look back, I can see.
So in other words, there dissonance arose. Now, part of what happens when you arrive at dissonance is that, well, there's your consciousness Congress is having something of a debate, maybe even a civil war or a fight. And at some point, you're going to have to figure out how to have your consciousness Congress find a way to manage the pluralism, the various tensions that are out there in the culture. And part of what I think part of the reason people are having this is we have seen such dramatic change in our culture over a short period of time. Someone just recently sent me this podcast on the witch trials of J.K. Rowling. Now you know who you are, who sent this to me, and congratulations, you get an achievement badge for colonizing PVK, because with one email. And I even had to go look it up, because when you send me podcasts that are just Apple podcasts, I got to do all the legwork. And I listened to the trailer, and yeah, I got hooked. So I'll play the trailer.
Why do you like Harry Potter?
It's a story about acceptance and love.
Like, I had not such a great childhood, and I think a kid with not such a great childhood actually.
Okay, do you notice that? It's a story about acceptance and love. Okay, so acceptance and love are good things. Where did we get that idea? Because, let's say for most little tribal groups, for most of human history, acceptance and love were not good ideas, because when the stranger comes around, you should kill them because they might kill you. So acceptance and love, pretty risky, but no, Harry Potter's about acceptance and love. Really? Is that what Harry Potter's about? I thought it was about like witches and Voldemort and beating Voldemort.
Could actually escape to something.
Why do you like Harry Potter?
It's a story about acceptance and love.
Like, I had not such a great childhood, and I think a kid with not such a great childhood actually escaped to something else in a book.
So Harry Potter is about acceptance and love. Harry Potter is about escapism.
Teaches the importance of friendships.
Harry Potter is about friendships.
The importance of forgiveness.
Harry Potter is about forgiveness. Did Voldemort get forgiven? Should Voldemort be forgiven, or should Voldemort be defeated? Is Voldemort bad because he doesn't forgive? Is Harry good because he does forgive? What about the dead parents? Why do all these stories have dead parents?
The way people pull together, they're different, and they don't all exactly agree.
Oh, Harry Potter's about diversity and diverse people working together.
one another, but they can say, okay, this is the common good and this is what we're going to work for.
Okay, Harry Potter's about groups of people working together for the common good, as if common good is something that is self-evident and just drops out of the sky or emerges, pops out of the ground like crabgrass.
What do you think of J.K. Rowling?
Where did this come from?
So there's a lot of controversy with that one.
Oh, we do our cognitive outsourcing with each other. And how are we supposed to feel about someone we don't really know personally or just by reputation? We sort of look around and we're part of a body that has ideas about who we are and what we should believe and this and that.
So I have a comment I'll say off the thing.
So I want to say a comment, but I don't want you to record it, which means must be heterodox. Well, what is the orthodoxy? Where does the orthodoxy arrive at? And how long has that orthodoxy been in effect?
I never set out to upset anyone. However, I was not uncomfortable with getting off my pedestal. And what has interested me over the last 10 years, and certainly in the last few years, last 2-3 years, particularly on social media, you've ruined your legacy. Oh, you could have been beloved forever, but you chose to say this.
Oh, you could have been beloved forever. Maybe that's what a spiritual home looks like. It looks like adoration and having a great reputation and have everybody love you and being fabulously wealthy because you wrote a book series that means you're never going to lack for money for the rest of your life.
And I think you could not have misunderstood me more profoundly.
Now, the person who makes this is Megan Phelps-Roper, and that name might not ring a bell to you, but Megan Phelps-Roper is a woman that grew up in Westboro Baptist Church, and that name might not ring a bell, but Westboro Baptist Church was the church that would go out to all sorts of places with anti-gay signs, and they would also go to, let's say, military funerals with anti-gay signs, and Megan Phelps-Roper was a part of the family that was, because what often happens in these little churches is that you have families that sort of run the thing, and she was part of the family that was at the center of that church.
I'm Megan Phelps-Roper, and coming soon, The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling. Subscribe wherever you listen.
So J.K. Rowling was a woman who, on one hand, for a while, was a feminist hero because she left a dysfunctional relationship. She left, in fact, an abusive relationship, and she got out with her child, and she wrote these books, and this was a story of triumph and liberation of someone leaving a bad relationship and coming to write this book series that seemed to bless the world. But very quickly, that was in the 1990s, then suddenly you had all these Christian groups that didn't like J.K. Rowling because they were concerned about witchcraft and devils and this and witches and warlocks and magic and all of that stuff. And then, then she was, a cause celeb on the left against all these conservative Christians. But then, of course, she has a bunch of tweets about transgenderism, and now she's hated, and so people don't know what to do with J.K. Rowling. And so Megan Phelps-Roper, who is obviously not someone who is a stranger to conservative religion or transforming out of it, writes about that. So let's go back to this.
That, I was taught to disown and dishonor my intuition. That's the flesh. Don't believe, don't trust your flesh, trust the word of God. And so I was constantly kind of intellectualizing and trying to coercively suppress my inner wisdom, which, now I would say is really the contact point with in an authentic spirituality or an authentic connection with source or the world or life or.
Okay. You got to really, the words go by fast, but source is now sort of this other word for God. And, it's interesting with the video I made about the Exodus thing where you have this modernist emergence. I want to talk a lot more about this of, well, is there one God or more gods? And what do we mean by Elohim? And Well, there's the creator God. Okay, but how about all the subcreation that has been happening for generations now? And how on earth do we conceptualize good, bad, right, and wrong? How do we conceptualize angels and demons? And what on earth do we mean by this word spiritual when in fact we are on a quest for a spiritual home? Not easy.
Universe, however you want to say it. And so, it was such a
source, universe. We don't want to say God, any ABC, anything but Christian. Again, I've told the story before. You got a lot of friends who are post-Christian, and a friend of mine, in fact, grew up Hispanic, deeply Roman Catholic Hispanic society, changed his name to sort of a Hindu name, deep into American Indian spirituality for a while. And I remember he had a birthday party, which was thrown by his wife, and there was a whole bunch of us there, and there was a musician there, and was playing just these songs from around the world, and then wanted to play a song that came out of the Christian tradition. And this person made 5 minutes worth of disclaimers before they dared play the song. And it was just like, you didn't give any disclaimers for Celtic spirituality or Hindu spirituality or Native American spirituality or American folk music, which again has deeply Christian roots. But for that one, boy, you've got to give the disclaimers. And
a deeply painful experience, and it took me a long time to come back to a new kind of spirituality that's not dogmatic, but that still feels really real and rich and a part of my daily life. And so that feels like a real intersection with your work. And your work has also really facilitated that process for me, in that, as I've been seeking and, this kind of new way of relating to source, kind of encountering your work and seeing that there is a there, that, that I don't have to kind of write off my experiences with spirituality. It really gave me some permission and validation to continue exploring the inner process that I've been engaged in, I think.
Now there's a whole vocabulary that comes along with this, and a lot of this vocabulary is on display here. And that's not a bad thing. You need a vocabulary, but how do we talk about this stuff?
For probably my entire life, consciously and unconsciously.
Yeah. So wow, yeah, lots of convergence. A couple questions come to mind. One, do you feel that when you were in that,
again, sorry about the sound levels, that he's just way louder than she is, and a la the first couple of years of my videos, I try to keep the sound levels a little bit more even.
And this isn't just a professional question. This is also personal in that it reflects back on me and my own attempts to understand things. So I'm sort of asking for your help, not just for an answer. Do you think that framework, that conservative Christian framework, do you think it was in any way affording your spirituality, or was your spirituality in spite of it? I understand that there was a tension there, but did it also afford the birth of a spiritual taste?
I think it absolutely did.
Right.
That's what's such a mindfuck about it.
Yes, exactly. That's what
the what John Van Donk and I, when we first talked about setting up this conference in May, the initial idea was, our initial topic was religious tradition, resource or baggage. And neither John nor Jonathan liked that at all. And John was like, I don't think I'd have anything to say with this. But what John just said right there and what she just said right there is exactly what we meant by that phrase. This is, I think, when I talk to people, what John just touched on right there is it for so many people. And I love it that, well, now we can talk, can't we? Because we can get into a sifting and evaluative mode, because this is what's happening on a major scale. And this is really where, when we get into the whole autodidact, can Sam fit into an evangelical church? Can she fit into a Christian community? Can John fit into a Christian community? Could I fit into an Orthodox church if I decided to go that way, or a Roman Catholic church? If the Christian Reformed Church breaks up in a won't break up in a million pieces because there aren't a million pieces of it, but breaks up in a dozen pieces, and I suddenly lose what I have as a spiritual home and what I've had for a spiritual home for the last almost 60 years, where would I go? What would I do? How would I evaluate it? When I can give all sorts of critiques, because I've also told this story many times. One of my professors of Old Testament at the seminary was John Steck, wonderfully wise, smart, very good reader of the Hebrew text, was part of the NIV translation team, and people in the Christian Reformed Church knew that. Christian Reformed Church was quite instrumental in the launch of the New International Version of the Bible, and people would come up to John Steck and they'd be like, I've got the problem with this one translation that you have here. And he's basically like, you've got one problem, you should see my list. Because, of course, translations are done by committee. You can't have a spiritual home if there's no one to share your home with. Then it's just a spiritual cell. And if all you, in fact, have is a spiritual cell and you're a community of one, or you're a community of just your consciousness congress, you don't really have a community and you're not really going to have home.
So that's how they get you, because there is a real thing that's happening in the church. I mean, you go and you're just awash with this spiritual presence of community, of worship, of kind of this experience with the divine and with, parts of our consciousness that aren't ordinarily accessible. And yet, and so then, and that's also, as I've come to sort of see more recently, and I'm not by any stretch an expert in these things, but that's also part of the kind of political indoctrination and radicalization in a way.
Because in many ways, again, back to the sort of the equilibrated state, this not only has to be me and future me and past me, not only do I have to integrate sort of my whole life story, I have to integrate my family, my loved ones, my street, my neighborhood, my city, my town, my polis, my world. I mean, all of this stuff has to fit together. And this is part of the struggle that's going on with liberalism, because in some ways, I do believe that secularity in the West was basically like humanism, basically a watered down Protestantism, because the religious container is the biggest, broadest container, and that fit into it. And then suddenly when you have more divergent applications and religions and traditions coming in, that suddenly the Western implicit agreements that people didn't even know they had and never had to articulate because everybody sort of shared them. Well, now suddenly, now we have political issues, and at least within the frame of the West, where, let's say, post-Hobbes, the government has a monopoly on violence. Well, what if you're an anarchist and don't believe there should be a government? What if you're a Christian anarchist, which I'm still trying to figure out, what on earth my friends who are Christian anarchists, how that gets applied to them, because they certainly have shown to me that they're good citizens. I don't see them stocking guns or explosives in order to, blow up churches or blow up the government or anything like that. They're perfectly wonderful people, but how on earth do we live together? Because politics is, in fact, the way to practically live together and to agree on hierarchies and practices and ideals and how that all fleshes out.
Yeah, I agree.
Which is really, I'd never sort of thought about that component until very recently. Like, oh wow, this actually, there's some kind of a purposeful, orchestration of that is in service of some somewhat nefarious, ends, in my opinion.
Nefarious, of course, is another evaluation of something, but everyone has, at least in very low resolution and very rough draft and very first draft, sort of ideals and ideas of how, in fact, something like this should be fleshed out. And of course, again, in my denomination, when you bump into a fight over something like same-sex marriage, bang, there it is. And we're going to have to talk about it.
Yes.
That's a little bit outside the scope of my expertise, so I don't want to dive too deep there.
No, I agree with what you said, but I won't drag you into that area of discussion.
That's too bad, because that's the best place of having an area of discussion, in my opinion.
The one, I want to follow up on what you just said about how, it's this double-edged sword kind of thing. Did you go through a period where you I went through a period where I became very atheistic, militant. I wanted to just have nothing to do with any of that. And then it took a lot of work and therapy and an ecology of practices and discussion, some very good discussions with good faith Christians, to ameliorate that and open me back up. Did you go through a similar phase where you sort of locked against the spiritual, or did it always stay active for you?
I did, to some extent. I wouldn't have probably called myself an atheist. I probably would have called myself agnostic for a long time.
Right.
But there were a lot of days of nihilism and just like, it's all
Yes.
meaningless, it's all
Yes.
material,
Yeah.
it's all, but that, there was some part of me that couldn't fully rationalize. I don't know if you're familiar with G.K. Chesterton's work, but
Just a little tiny bit.
You should read Orthodoxy. It's a really marvelous work, and it touches on a lot. But I wish I could sort of capture the sentiment of what he writes. But he kind of says, how could the entire universe be less meaningful than sort of, our daily encounters, in the supermarket, in a way. And so there's just a way in which it's like, it doesn't make any sense that we have this experience, this human experience with beauty, with meaning, with connection, and that somehow the entire universe is completely meaningless and has amounts to nothing. Like it just doesn't make sense that the sum of the parts is greater than the entire system.
Right.
Or the parts, rather, not the sum.
I knew what you meant. Was there a single experience that sort of opened you back up to the spiritual, or was it a more of an incremental progression?
So I would say a little bit of both. I would say there were, a series of, there was an incremental progression of becoming more connected spiritually and more trusting. And, your work was one of the facilitative steps, or aspects of that journey. I've had some really powerful altered states of consciousness.
Right.
And I've never used psychedelics. I just have a mind that sort of naturally finds that kind of state of consciousness through various means, not necessarily even practices, through practices, but that's not the only way that I've encountered those things. And I had almost an experience of like how people describe ayahuasca or psychedelics. I actually think I was taking a supplement that just did some weird things to my body that I don't think it was supposed to do. And wow, that was really solidified. Like, you hear the studies that people really kind of in the long term change their entire belief system after having experiences with psychedelics. And in a way, that experience, I wouldn't say changed my belief system, because I was already kind of exploring that path and going down that road, but it really solidified a confidence or a trust in the noetic.
So was the experience...
So many places, at least a handful of times in the Exodus series, Jordan Peterson sort of brings out this quip by Jung, was it a joke, that the reason you have religious tradition is to avoid spiritual experiences. And I think that's right. Even though, because what religious traditions try to do in some ways is to tame them. And I think it tames them in a similar way to the reason that communities tend to tame sexuality, communities tend to tame all sorts of more chaotic aspects of us, because chaos is hard on community. And so you both have to sort of build up the rigor and durability of community, so that in many ways, so that you can sort of level up the more chaotic and experiential aspects. So, and you see this in, let's say, very Christian charismatic communities, and it's always sort of a challenge because those experiences can destroy a community pretty quickly, and that's exactly why dogmas and orthodoxies develop, because the dogmas and the orthodoxies are containers for the rather chaotic but also sometimes deeply satisfying and exciting experiences. These things are often sort of set against each other, but I think the truth is that they are, in fact, in many ways deeply for each other. Now, I want to get at another video here. So I find J.P. Sears' recent Got God video to be very fascinating, because there's an example of someone sort of moving in the other direction. I mean, he's coming from a very New Age place and going to moving to a red state and taking on some of those politics and taking on some of this God language, just sort of at a very low resolution. It's very interesting listening to that video. And then the algorithm immediately popped up this person, Melissa Doherty, who I had never heard of at all. But just by looking at her thumbnails, she looks sort of like standard Christian YouTube. And there's a reason I'm such an unsuccessful pastor, because I just see this stuff sometimes and I get a bad attitude, and I really got to watch my biases and my prejudices, because the truth is that once I get to know people, I almost always begin to deeply love them, even the trolls out there who troll my channel and like to make disparaging and dismissing comments. I don't like. Anyway, so Christian YouTube to me is sort of this combination of concern trolling. Oh, here's this thing we all need to be concerned about, and then slapping on sort of this boilerplate Christian message. Here's all the problems, and here how Jesus fixes it, all in a nice little package. And yeah, but I'm always a little skeptical about your little package, because I've had many packages, and packages can do wonderfully well, but do they really scale all the way around? So anyway, she did a thing on J.P. Sears, and then Karen had sent me a little note on Twitter or somewhere and said, yeah, but that really fits with her testimony. Now, for those of you who don't know Christian lingo, testimony is basically the story of how you became a Christian. And now I'm really annoyed because her so when you do a channel, you get these videos here, and this one was her testimony. And because I was tempted to make a video on her video to J.P. Sears, but before I listened to it, I thought I should really know who she is a little bit better. And I started listening to her testimony video, and I was just riveted. It was so good. So I'm going to summarize it a little bit, because the video is 40 minutes long, and I don't have 40 minutes to walk through it, because 40 minutes walking through it would mean a 2-hour video. And I know I've made a lot of short videos lately, and some of you are complaining about that, but sorry, it's Holy Week, and I've got 2 sermons to do, and I want them to be worth something, so they just take time. And if you have any idea the amount of reading you have to do about something like Good Friday or Easter, it's a lot. Anyway, she starts out growing up in sort of a non-Christian household, completely sort of a New Age household, and she realized that she was kind of a liar, and she was making her way through life by lying, trying to pick up her reputation. But then one of her lies caught her out, and then I'll see if I can find this little place, because this is a lovely video. I really liked it.
Best visualizing, things like that those words were very popular words in my household. You could manifest your reality. You could visualize things. There was this inner divinity that we were taught. And something kind of interesting as well, I had this fascination with the supernatural in general, whether it was paranormal, whether it was any sort of spiritual event, I was absolutely fascinated by it. And my mom in particular had had a lot of spiritual experiences growing up. She had things happen to her that I almost wished would happen to me. I saw her as more spiritual because these things were happening to her. She would see things like auras. She would be able to see lights around people sometimes. She had a lot of experiences where she would have this visitor come to her. She would have beings have interactions with her. And beyond that, we would also have really creepy things happen to us when we were kids as well. And you'd think that that would...
Now I've got your attention, I know. and part of what makes this little corner so vibrant is, of course, I mean, John comes at this stuff with a deeply science-based, but yet a lot of openness. And so he's skeptical about the woo, but he's not dismissive about the woo like a new ager. And so it's what makes all of this that's what makes this little corner so much fun to be in.
Scare me as a kid, but it didn't. I wanted more. What it did is that it gave me a weird rush. It gave me some sort of knowing that there's something more out there that's tangible, that I can actually experience and see and witness. And I wanted more of that because it showed me that there's something beyond what I can see. So I wouldn't think that there's anything bad with a psychic or crystals or anything like that. Channeling spirits, it was a non-issue to me, but it wasn't something I was actively pursuing or thinking about in great detail at the time. All I was concerned about as a teenager was impressing my friends. So my life is kind of spiritually devoid. I'm kind of depressed. I'm in this really confused mind space as a teenager. I have no aim. I don't have any sort of happiness or joy. And I started dating somebody, and this is where everything changes. I cared a lot about this person, and I ended up, long story short, telling them a pretty big lie that I basically got caught in. As a result, they, of course, broke up with me, and it catapulted me into a really deep depression. I became suicidal. I didn't want to live. Every day was absolute torture. It was pure darkness. It was nothing brought me joy. I didn't want to live anymore at all. There was no reason for me to live. I hated my life. I hated who I was. I didn't like who I was. Nobody liked me. I felt, it was a self-hate that I had. I had a very low self-esteem, low self-confidence. I started thinking of ways I could end my life. And I'm really grateful there wasn't a gun in my house at this time, because that would have been the quick, easy way to do it. So I started getting really creative and thinking, okay, what's the quickest, easiest way to do this? And there was a big bottle of prescription pills in our cabinet that I knew would do the trick. And I started kind of actively planning this, thinking what day, when I would do this. I also was so depressed that I didn't even want to eat. I didn't want to eat anything. I didn't eat. I lost a lot of weight during this time. There was a point where I even quit taking in fluids. I think because I just felt like I didn't deserve it. It was emotional and mental torture. Well, it was around this time that God got a hold of me. I remember it was the weekend, and I was hanging out with one of my friends, mindlessly just hanging out. I literally was trying to waste time. We get a call from one of our mutual friends and asked us if we wanted to go to a house of another mutual friend of ours at a house party, to go hang out at this house party with our friend. And at the time we said no. All I wanted to do was go home and go to bed, because that seemed to be the only relief I had was sleep. Because while I was sleeping, it just felt like the pain wasn't as intense. And I dropped off my friend and I'm heading home. And I even remember the exact road I was on, what time of night it was, where I was driving on this road. When I decided, you know what? No, I'm actually going to go to this party. And I remember that just there was nothing special about wanting to go to the party. It's not like I felt like this urgency to go. I just changed my mind and did a U-turn. It's kind of prophetic when you think about it. I did. I turned my car around and went back to this party that I had been invited to. And I walk in, and I'm going to give my friend an alias. I'm going to call him Mike. I walk into the house where this party is happening, and Mike, my friend who had invited me, was in the corner right as I walked in, just almost looking like he's in an argument with somebody. He's being very, very insistent about something. He's being very animated about something he's saying. And I didn't pay any attention. I mean, I went and grabbed my bottle of wine or whatever it was and sat down on the couch, just kind of drowning in my sorrows. And as I sat down, Mike is still arguing a lot. He's being very loud about it, to the point where our friends have to calm him down. It turns out what had happened is Mike just got saved. He had just found Jesus. And he's at this party telling everybody about Jesus. And nobody's listening to him. But he was very evangelistic at the time. I remember everybody just kind of telling him to chill out. I was sitting on the couch, and he's going on about whatever it is that he was going on about at that moment. I remember he was continuing to talk, and there was something he said, of course, to a spiritual nature that I had disagreed with. And what he said next changed everything in my life. And it was so simple. All he did, I remember him pointing at me, and he said, "No, there's nothing that you've done that God cannot forgive. He loves you." And I know, you guys, I know it. I know. Isn't that so simple? It's so simple. But that hit me hard. I did not grow up with the gospel in my house. There was an essence of not understanding forgiveness. Now, growing up in my household, I was taught certain things about God. I was taught some things that were true and some things that were not true. But I had never heard that quite like that before. What my friend was telling me was that...
And that's really key, that there's always a moment, and this is, my Calvinist way, why I always say, well, evangelism is the work of the Holy Spirit, because she could have been in that party at any other time and any other frame of mind, and she'd heard this, but that dude's annoying. But where she was at right at that moment hits her, and bang, her life changes. And I'll jump a little bit ahead here.
Peace. There was this weight lifted off of me. And I didn't know anything about what the Bible said. I didn't know what it said about being a new creation, being born again, nothing. But I remember sitting up in my bed. I remember even how I was sitting. I'm like, wow, the sun shining through the window, and I hear birds chirping, and I felt this joy and this peace. It was incredible. There were two things that really struck me. First, I don't know who that person was yesterday. I woke up with this sense of a new identity. And remember, I hadn't read the Bible. I didn't know anything about being born again or the new creation, nothing. I felt like I was this new person. And the second thing was my insatiable hunger to know more about what my friend said last night. I wanted to read the Bible. I wanted to watch. I remember trying to find preachers on TV. All I wanted to do was know more. It was this hunger. Anything I could have gotten my hands on to teach me more about Jesus at this time, I was all over it. I remember calling my friend after this, telling him, "You absolutely changed my life. Everything that you said that night, I believed, and I am just completely in love with Jesus right now." And I told everybody, if anybody who would listen to me, I told them about Jesus, about what had happened to me. If I could have shouted it from the rooftops, I would have. I started going to church, and I got to be honest, during that summer of my life, I remember I had just turned 17, and then that summer, it was the best summer ever.
She arrived at a spiritual home
Of my life. I was just on my honeymoon with God. I was just wanting to know more and wanting to read more, but another problem arose. The thing is about me.
It's the journey, Lex says. Well, yeah.
Is that people that know me and people that are familiar with who I am as a person, I can be very inquisitive. And it's not always the easiest thing to deal with that with me, if I'm honest. I had just had this amazing experience with Jesus, with God, and I was never the same ever after that. Completely different, 180, but I had a lot of questions about the Bible. And there were things I didn't understand. I didn't understand how we got the Bible. What's up with that? Because I always was taught that there's extra books that were outside the Bible, that there's much more that God revealed to mankind that's not in the Bible. We can't trust the Bible. And then if I were to read the Bible, I had questions about that. What about Jesus being God? Who is he praying to in the garden? What about people that have never heard the gospel? The basic questions that any new believer would ask, I asked them.
And if you notice, she's only 18 minutes into 41 minutes of her testimony. So then she's going to get to a point where she begins to realize that, well, she's kind of, she's got all of these, her first, the first draft that she was given from her family life has all kinds of things that are now kind of in conflict with some other things in her head. And so then she discovers apologetics, and then that's going to lead to some places. And then, of course, if you go to her channel, she's kind of about, kind of an anti-New Age thing, I expect, kind of anti-woke. And so, yeah, now she's doing the Christian YouTube thing, and and then you see the sort of the usual cast of characters. Beckett Cook's on there to talk about the gay stuff, and some of these people.
There's always been a.
I had Monique Dusan. She was on my channel. I did a Randall's conversation with her. She was a lot of fun. So that's where you sort of get back to this whole, the political thing. The political thing. That's all part of the package, and somehow the whole package has to fit together, and somehow the whole package will probably not, for many people who are high in openness, will not be in some static state for the rest of their life. In fact, if things are in a static state for the rest of their life, they'll probably think that they're already dead before they're physically dead. So, yeah. Well, I think that's enough for now. And I think I've placed a whole bunch of new interesting videos and podcasts in front of you to listen to, and I'll keep listening to them. And I still haven't forgotten all the other way too many threads I'm working on at one time. I'm still thinking about Vatican I and Vatican II and the Pope on Twitter and Jordan Peterson's Exodus story, but the quest for a spiritual home is coming up in June, not May. It's coming up in May. I'm doing an event. We're talking about an event. It's already planned. Marcus gets on these things in Washington, D.C. in June. And I'm looking at Westerns, and I'm looking at how people I know are on Twitter and how I know them on YouTube, and then, how we know them in real life, and how does that work together. So there's no end to cool stuff. So, yeah. Wanted to put some of these things down, and let me know what you think.